You see everyone. I don't see John. There we all are. And let's look at some of the questions. I'm going to look at some of the questions that we were asked. And while I'm looking up those questions, looks like there's a lot of common themes among our work. And I think one of the important things is, you know, the worries and concerns about starting, which are daunting. It does take time, you know, to figure out what you're going to do first. We can start small. We can visit with others who are doing, especially if you're a farmer or a rancher, you can visit farms or ranches and talk to other cities who are already starting programs. And then there's lots of resources like in our NPRA and in RPA. I always get the two mixed up between Parks and Rec and Xerces. So there's lots of resources. But I think I'd like for you guys to discuss the idea that if you're going to look at the cost over the long term, that we really, like John said, we have no choice but to make some of these changes, and the sooner the better we start implementing them. Can you guys talk about how you've worked with others to get them over those initial jitters to jump right in and start, and some ways that you can do it cost effectively, you know, maybe just to get your feet wet and try, you know, the first few times?
Well, maybe I'll go first. I guess we advocate for adopting full systems adoption or change. If people take, you know, one baby step at a time, a lot of times these food systems don't work very well. And so what I try to explain to farmers is we really need you to take a small, you know, maybe 10-acre, 40-acre area of your farm and devote it to a system. And practice on that, cut your teeth on that, and then expand out. What we find is with that, it dampens the risks, and then it also allows you to, yeah, I mean, whenever you make changes like this, you make mistakes. Nobody made more than I did when I started Blue Dasher, that's for sure. But as you learn from those mistakes, other people can benefit from that too. So.
Yeah, and then there's, does anybody else have anything to add to that?
I would say from the city perspective, you know, cities are already managing habitat and open spaces and have sort of stuck in the 1980s prescription of having very, you know, design palettes and not considering it being like, oh, well, you know, flip the script and think of it differently. You know, the idea of maybe doing an urban prairie might not be the right idea for every municipality or park. But if you go into a space and create a palette of maybe 10 different native plants, create more of a designed, you know, garden or the space in that area, landscape designers can do this pretty easily. I think it's just changing the way our perspective is on how we manage our land. Maybe, and I know what you're doing, the systems change would be good for a ranch, but sometimes with municipalities, doing it step by step, creating those broad systems of, you know, a group of people on the ground in parks who are doing this work together so they can learn from one another and understand the pluses and minuses, educational gaps they need, whether it's maintenance teams, natural resource managers, landscape architects, bring them together to do like a case study or a site, and starting one point at a time and growing from there. Also, I feel like within cities and parks is that actually sourcing native material is rather hard for them because they have limited budgets. So a lot of times it's creating one space first, using that as a seed source or a plant source, and slowly growing from there. And once they can really garner some additional support and funding, then they can grow and maybe even do their own greenhouses. So it's a kind of a long-term solution there, but.
Yeah, and speaking from the municipal perspective, you know, one of the things I've noticed in our city and other cities I talk to across the country is that you really need to give your staff permission to experiment and make mistakes, and know that not, like John said, not everything is going to work out. You're going to fail in lots of cases, but they need to know you have their back, and, you know, not make them so nervous about it that they, and then give them, you know, just lots of kudos just for trying, and then really celebrate when it works. And then the other thing you pointed out is a real issue, the aesthetics that the public expects. And so, you know, sometimes we can just explain to them why we're doing something the way we're doing it by a campaign. Like, I mean, for organic turf management, for instance, you may see more dandelions than normal, especially in the early spring, but then you don't see them much after that. So you can have it. We had a campaign in Boulder where we likened seeing a dandelion means that your turf is safe and healthy for your kids to play on because it hasn't been treated with pesticides. Or you can put up signs, you know, for an area that's like a little messy looking natural area with pollinator plants to explain why it's there. So I think it's really on us as a community to ask for it and help educate neighbors. And it's on us as city staff to show why we're doing what we're doing. Dusty, we have a question for you. Like how do ranchers sign up for the Audubon ranching practice program? And is there a requirement to how big a ranch has to be? Is there a minimum size requirement? Oh, it sounds like you're muted, Dusty. Still can't hear you. I don't have control. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's showing you muted. Yeah, I don't know why it's not working. That sucks. Because I can see you're not muted, but is your computer volume turned up? Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening. We'll try to figure this out, and then maybe we can get Dusty to, you guys can contact Dusty if we can't get his volume working, or if he can go out and maybe, yeah, unfortunately somebody says write in chat. It's hard for us when we're in Zoom. We're actually in Zoom to bring up the Boost Central window when we're in Zoom at the same time. And he might be able to do that if he makes sure that Dusty, if you make sure the Zoom, I think he may have left and he's going to come back on. I don't see him anymore. Let me see if he's still here. Oh, he's back.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Six.
I don't know what was going on. I guess I just got out of the Zoom and came back in. So yes, we do have a minimum acreage that's 500 acres, but we take a lot of things into consideration for that, and so that's not a hard and fast rule. Ultimately, if somebody's interested, they can email me, reach out to me, and I can send them all the information they need to see what it would look like. And it's going to be depending on kind of where you live. So I can kind of be the gatekeeper for that and pass you on to the right people. If it's Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, Utah, it'll come to me. If it's the Dakotas, I'll send you to somebody else. And so, yeah, I would happily send you to the right place.
Yeah, and then here's a question for I would assume for John, how to transition from old school farming stuck attitudes to growing better foods that are good for consumers. And my text just moved again. And farmers, healthy foods and ecosystems.
Could you say that one more time? I caught
Okay.
pieces of it.
Yeah, and the text keeps moving on, trying to read it. How to transition from old school farming stuck attitudes to growing better foods that are good for consumers and farmers, healthy foods and ecosystems.
Yeah, well, that's what we're trying to do. Social change is hard. I think data has to be there, and we're trying to generate, as much science as we can that shows, this isn't just an anecdote, it doesn't just work on one farm, it's consistent, and if you do this, this, and this, then it provides a bit of a roadmap for success. That removes some of the risk and perception. But it's so much more than that, right? It's a change in mindset. And many of the early adopters in this movement kind of had an aha moment. And maybe it was, failure of a certain aspect of their farm, or maybe it was meeting somebody who was making this happen and meeting a champion within their community. And so understanding what those are and sort of trying to capitalize on that is really important. So yeah, communicating nutrient density and nutrient diversity is increased is probably important from a consumer's perspective. Getting the medical community on board with this, so many of our human health problems right now are connected to the way that we're producing our food. But they have no idea, right, that this is a major driver of our health system. Yeah, policymakers have to be involved.
Here's a good question for you, Dusty and John both. Do you guys have intern programs for students to spend time learning your practices?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do within Audubon. We've got a couple of different programs where we have interns that come out and spend some time on our certified ranches, primarily in the Rockies region. There are a couple in the Dakotas as well, but we work with obviously the University of Wyoming, SDSU, CSU, and that's a really important aspect of that. Of the program is again, I guess, one of the things that I'm trying to do as a rancher and also with Audubon is it's kind of like what John said, of change that perception of what really should be accepted to a consumer and what should be acceptable to a consumer and what they really need, the information they need to know to make good choices. And I feel like that's really, really important. And that starts with a lot of our young folks. It starts with a lot of our colleges to make sure that, the data, the scientific data that we're putting out there that says this is the better way to do things is rigorous. And so the internships are important, and the more folks we can get involved, the better. So.
Yeah, I think it's really important that young people farm. We keep hearing stories about these, older farmers now that feel like they're the last of their generation who's going to continue working their family farm. And we need to attract young people back. And I don't think a big monoculture, it attracts young people. It's not exciting, but I think it's really important. Yeah, it's really important that we talk about that this is the solution to saving the planet. We can sequester carbon. John, wasn't there just a new paper that came out talking about, or was it the Rodale's report that talked about how if we were to convert to all regenerative farming, how we could sequester enough carbon, to make to essentially solve the greenhouse gas emissions issue.
Yeah, one of the projects that we were involved in, their early estimates were that if we were to convert, I think it was even 20% of the rangelands in the U.S. over to an AMP style of grazing, that that the benefits of that could offset many of our carbon emissions on a national level. So I don't know whether we can bandy about numbers, but certainly I think it's a major part of the solution, if not entirely the solution.
Yeah, right. And I just keep thinking about how important it is that we just keep thinking biodiversity and soil. That's the answer to everything. We do that with our mosquito program in Boulder, which is challenging and fun. So like all of our 500 larval breeding sites this year, we had an ecological contractor do a biodiversity survey once a month at every single one of them.
Whoa.
That killed themselves, but they, then we're learning a lot, like what are the natural predators levels and complexes that will keep mosquito numbers low enough that you should never even have to apply BTI.
Wow.
It's free. That's free pest control, and we need to be thinking about that. And
that's something that every place else in the country is going to be able to use, I've never seen that done before. That's great.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. So, that's the other thing, is it may be daunting and scary to start, but it is exciting to put these programs together and see them work. Like, like everyone is talked about all day long. You put the plants in and the insects show up, the birds show up. You start seeing life again instead of these manicured urban landscapes, or these, thousands of acres of corn and soybean with not one living thing. You can crawl around on your hands and knees and look and not find hardly one living thing in these big monoculture farms. So how do we get the public? Here's a good question for all of you before we maybe start our breakouts. How do we get the public to value insects instead of wanting to kill them all the minute they see them in their yards or their houses? I mean, how do we get people to love insects like they did when they were little kids, or hopefully did when they were little kids?
You know, I don't, you know, personally, I don't, yes, I try to educate people, and bugs are cool, right? And maybe getting them when they're children is important. I don't make it a question about, you know, insects, though. I think if we focus on soil health, and if we focus on, you know, birds and other, you know, very charismatic things like this, I think that the insects will come along. But certainly I don't think ignoring them is important, but I don't know if they're going to star in that show. Maybe certain groups. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you? Does the BioBlitz seem to help, Michelle? For you know, when you talk to this different.
To say, we did a national survey that showed that majority of 95% of the public in the country is vastly supportive of pollinators and their habitat in parks and in their communities. So it's not that people don't support pollinators. I think when you talk about bugs in general, I think there's some education about what is a pollinator. Some people really think about the butterflies and moths, but really beetles and flies are some of the biggest pollinators that we need. I think it's really educating people the depth of it. And like you said, the BioBlitz has, from our perspective, has really helped, because we've had agencies who've never hosted any sort of community science or engagement campaign, bringing their community in and just having a great time and educating not only themselves, but their community about what they're really seeing in their parks. And then also that tells them, you know, what actually is, what is there, both from an invasive species side as well as a native side. So teaching them the vast gamut of what biodiversity really means. And I think the educational programs, like, while people do a lot of educational programs, really thinking concisely and specifically about what is the end goal, what we're trying to achieve. So maybe, like John said, it's not like, let's talk about a pollinator, but talking about biodiversity at its core, and about, when I always talk about it, is the fact that we get native habitat right, we will get everything else right in the process, because that's what everything relies on. So that's kind of my perspective on it. It's like, maybe we just need to pivot a little bit on our end goal of what we communicate and what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about, you know, how to get the public educated about these things and caring about these things, so they'll change the practices in their own yards and they'll support the practices that we all work on. One of the things I worry about is the toll that this biodiversity crisis and mass extinction is having on those of us who are professionals working in the area. And I just wanted to throw this out there, it just came in my mind, but one big turning point for me is, for years I had been thinking about desperately trying to save certain species or certain groups of taxa, you know, whether it's one bumblebee species or, you know, whole complexes. And it finally dawned on me that with climate change and biodiversity crisis, that we're going to have to start looking at things differently and thinking about how to save functioning ecosystems that provide services that we have to survive as a planet, as you know, to have food and clean water and have a pool of biodiversity. And I think that can be very tough. I think some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves about how we manage particularly natural areas are very difficult, especially with all the changes in plant ranges from climate change and, you know, pressure from invasive species. It was difficult before, and if we didn't have all these major levels at the crisis they are now, at the levels they are now, to manage those types of landscapes, to figure out how you restore them or preserve them. But it's very difficult for people to realize that, like for us in Boulder, that the ponderosa pine forest and mixed ponderosa pine forest that we love, that's in our open space land, is probably not going to be here in 10 or 20 years if we keep having the huge swings in temperature that we're having. And that's very emotional for people, and it's emotional for us. So, you know, we just have to keep shifting how we we manage and be just adjust quickly and really keep focusing on those ecological principles and ecological services. So I wanted to see if we have a few more questions that people might have before we go into the breakouts. I know it's getting late and everyone's tired, but I'm hoping that some of you are there listening are interested in chatting with each other about some of these issues. And then some of us can come and join you at those tables. But you guys, are there any like epiphanies or from listening to each other speak or big take-home messages that you have? And I was trying to remember, I don't know if you've all seen the Pollinators film. If you haven't, you should. I think it's done very well. And John's in that film, and at the very end, you say something, I was trying to remember what it is, but it really pulls it all together as you're, kneeling down, holding the soil and talking about like the big picture. And do you remember what you said?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. I keep telling everybody in my family, we gotta sit down and watch the Pollinators, and it's been a long time since I've seen it. So no, I apologize.
Oh, like somebody's right. So much talk of biodiversity. Where are the fungi? One of the most important things, in the soil ecosystem and many terrestrial ecosystems as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just kind of along those lines. I think there's a lot of different really successful approaches out there to when you're talking about the ecosystem. Sometimes, you've got folks that really focus on one aspect, and maybe that's, the fungi, it's soil health. Others are really, very focused on vegetation. When I look at the folks that I work with in the ranching community, I feel like the vegetation is kind of where everybody tends to kind of focus on. And I think one of the ways that all of the new information and all the resources, and I say this new, it's been out for obviously for years and years, for 20 some years, but is that it's nice to see folks in a rural area, and especially on ranches, looking at things on a much broader perspective. And so again, it's not just the cows and the vegetation. Now there's soil health. Now there's bird diversity. Now there's all that. Within the urban setting, it's the same thing of how do what we do here, all of those connections between the urban and the rural, and how all of us are on, a Zoom call today with very different backgrounds coming at it from very different perspectives, but ultimately we're all kind of converging on that same path. And so I think that's really fun, and I think it's exciting to have a chance to be here with everybody and to really talk about all of the great things that are going on right now across this community is really great.
Before we go to breakout, I just wanted to share with you guys, as we're thinking about ways we can do this work with tight budgets, everybody's hurting for money. A lot of organizations and cities are low on staff due to layoffs and furloughs from the COVID crisis. And we came up, I worked with Darren Davidson and Amy Yarger here at the Butterfly Pavilion with the city of Boulder. So we're trying to come up with some way of getting lots of plants. As you guys know, plants are very, very expensive, particularly native plants. And we're also trying to find ways of connecting the older folks in our community who are having to self-isolate due to COVID, who aren't able to come out. And now that it's peaking, that's happening again. So we rounded up a bunch of native plant seeds, some that our open space group had collected, and some from BBB Seed, who donated seed to us. And we put kits together, grow kits together to take to dozens of senior citizens who grew out seedlings for us. And then we went and collected them in the Butterfly Pavilions, growing them bigger so that we can put them out in the spring, but we'll start another seedling growing project in January or so. So what this does is it helps us essentially do a distributed community nursery. You think about what it was like, you know, with distributed computers. Remember in the old days before we had supercomputers that people would connect computers together, network them together to do big problems with astrophysicists and people like that. Now, looking at the same way, we can grow, instead of having one, you know, we can't afford to buy all the plants we need from greenhouses, but we can grow seed from seed gardens. We can get seed out to people and have them grow it out for us and put hundreds of thousands of plants into our communities. So that's one way we try to cheaply grow out lots of plants. We want to keep building and building on it, and then have other people grow plants out too, kids at schools, church groups, you know, whoever's interested, because we have to find ways of getting more and more of these plants out there in the community. So I would love if we could have some discussions, you know, about how that could work in all of our operations. You know, it's more difficult in certain types of programs than others, but those are the types of things we need to be thinking about, just like John came up with the Ecdysis Foundation, or as a way of funding research that isn't being done otherwise, isn't being funded by the grant agencies or the, you know, the universities necessarily. So sometimes we just have to do things ourselves to get the work done we need to get done. So that's just one example. And at this point, I would love to have everybody join a table. So I don't know if you guys did it this morning, but if you didn't, there are just below the screen, there are tables that you can join the video chat. And when, for those of you in our panel that can stick around and talk to folks, Dusty, you're going to go to table 10, right?
Yep.
Michelle, are you going to be able to join in some discussions? Because I know we have some
Yes.
municipalities here. So why don't you go to table 1? And John, are you able to stick around for a little bit?
Yeah, for a few minutes, yeah.
Okay, why don't you go to table 2? And Melissa, can you share your screen and put up the questions? So we just have some really simple questions. You can choose one that you'd like to I should have the slide number for you there. You can choose a question off this list, or you can discuss other issues that you'd like. And so we need to go to the Bumblebee conference room, Michelle, and the link is in the chat there. And then log in with your email address. And then you can join, it says join video chat at the bottom. And then we can have some discussions with folks. And I will join table 3 in just a minute. Do you see it? It's in the chat there. And then log in with your email address. And then you can join, it says join video chat at the bottom. And then we can have some discussions with folks. And I will join table 3. Okay, and just we'll log off and join the tables in just a minute. I can't remember what our questions are, and it's not coming up on the slide. Let me look real fast. See the one with the color stripes right below? Okay, there it is. Okay, let's bring that up, and then we'll go off Zoom and join you guys. For some reason, when you bring it up, it doesn't want to show it. Well, take a look before you join your table. Actually, let me go find out. I can't remember where I put the questions, and that's what happens when you're reliant on slides. And I can't get into my mail. Oh, you guys are seeing it? Okay, Darren says it's up, but I can't see what the questions are. So choose a question or two, and then join a table and have a discussion. And we'll leave the stream here. And when we're done with the breakout at about 3 o'clock, you can head back to the main room for Adrian's closing remarks.